The boarding gate at Chicago International Airport was crowded that afternoon. Passengers stood in line waiting to board Flight 217 to Los Angeles. Some people were checking their phones, others were talking quietly or sipping coffee while the gate agents scanned boarding passes. Among the travelers stood a tall, calm man wearing a gray jacket and carrying a small black medical bag. His name was Dr. Michael Carter. Most people around him had no idea who he was. To them, he looked like any other traveler heading to the West Coast, but inside that small medical bag were tools he carried almost everywhere, tools that had saved lives more times than he could count. Dr. Carter glanced at his watch. Boarding had just started. He stepped forward when his group number was called. The gate agent scanned the passenger ahead of him. Then she looked up at Dr. Carter. Her smile faded slightly. She studied his boarding pass for a moment longer than usual. Then she scanned it. The machine beeped, but she did not step aside. Instead, she looked at him again. "Sir, could you step to the side for a moment?" Dr. Carter blinked slightly, but stayed calm. "Is there a problem?" The gate agent avoided eye contact. "Just a quick verification." Passengers behind him began shifting impatiently. Dr. Carter stepped aside near the counter. He watched as the line continued moving and dozens of passengers walked down the jet bridge. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, he approached the counter again. "Excuse me, you asked me to step aside. Is there something wrong with my ticket?" The agent sighed softly. "Your ticket is fine, but we need to verify something." "Verify what exactly?" She hesitated. "A passenger reported that you were acting suspicious near the gate area." Dr. Carter looked confused. "Suspicious? In what way?" The agent shrugged slightly. "Sir, I just need you to wait while airport security takes a look at the situation." A few nearby passengers turned their heads toward the conversation. Dr. Carter felt the familiar, uncomfortable feeling in his chest. He had experienced moments like this before. Moments where someone looked at him and decided something did not belong. He took a slow breath. "All right, I will wait." 2 airport security officers arrived a few minutes later. One of them looked at the gate agent. "Did this him?" She nodded. "Yes." The officer turned to Dr. Carter. "Sir, we just need to ask you a few questions." Dr. Carter handed over his ID without hesitation. The officer studied it carefully. "Dr. Michael Carter?" "Yes." "Are you traveling alone today?" "Yes." "Do you have any items in your bag that could be considered hazardous?" Dr. Carter gestured to the small case beside him. "Just medical equipment." The officer frowned slightly. "Medical equipment? Yes, I am a doctor." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. Meanwhile, the last passengers finished boarding the plane. The gate area grew quiet. The gate agent leaned toward the officers and whispered something. The officers nodded slowly. One of them turned back to Dr. Carter. "Sir, we are going to ask you to step away from the boarding area for now." Dr. Carter looked toward the jet bridge. The plane door was still open. "My flight is about to leave." The officer shrugged slightly. "You can rebook another flight once this situation is cleared up." Dr. Carter remained calm, but his voice grew firmer. "What situation exactly?" The officer hesitated. "Sir, we received a complaint and we are required to investigate." Dr. Carter looked around the empty gate area. Then he picked up his bag. "All right." He followed the officers a few steps away from the gate. Inside, the aircraft passengers were settling into their seats. Flight attendants moved through the aisle, helping people store luggage. In seat 14C, a middle-aged man adjusted his tie and reached for his seatbelt. His name was Daniel Whitmore, a business executive traveling to Los Angeles for an important meeting. He suddenly felt a strange pressure in his chest. At first he ignored it, but the pressure grew stronger. Within seconds he began sweating heavily. The woman sitting next to him noticed something was wrong. "Are you okay?" Donald tried to respond, but the words would not come out. His hand gripped the armrest tightly. Then he collapsed sideways in his seat. The woman gasped loudly. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle. "Sir, can you hear me?" There was no response. Passengers began whispering nervously. Someone said, "Call a doctor." Another passenger shouted, "Is there a doctor on this flight?" The flight attendants looked around the cabin, but no one stood up. The man in seat 1 was barely breathing. The captain was notified immediately. "We may have a medical emergency in the cabin." Back at the gate, the aircraft door was suddenly reopened. A flight attendant rushed out toward the counter. "We need medical assistance. A passenger has collapsed." The gate agent froze. Security officers looked at each other. "Do we have a doctor nearby?" One of the officers slowly turned toward Dr. Carter. Dr. Carter was standing just a few feet away holding his medical bag. He had heard everything. The officer blinked. "You said you were a doctor." The officer looked back toward a jet bridge, then back at Dr. Carter. "Sir, we may need your help." Dr. Carter did not hesitate. He grabbed his bag and walked quickly toward the aircraft door. Inside the cabin, passengers moved aside as he approached seat 14C. The unconscious man was pale and barely breathing. Dr. Carter immediately knelt beside him. He opened his medical bag and began checking the man's pulse. The cabin was silent. Seconds felt like minutes. The flight attendants watched anxiously. Finally, Dr. Carter spoke. "He is having a heart attack." Passengers gasped. "We need space and we need oxygen." The crew moved quickly. Dr. Carter began working with calm precision. He administered medication from his emergency kit. Then he instructed a flight attendant to bring the onboard medical equipment. Minutes passed. The man's breathing slowly improved. Color returned to his face. A faint pulse grew stronger under Dr. Carter's fingers. The cabin filled with relieved whispers. After several tense minutes, the man's eyes slowly opened. He looked confused. Dr. Carter smiled slightly. "Easy. You are going to be all right." Applause began spreading through the cabin. Passengers who had been watching the entire scene began clapping. The flight attendants looked at Dr. Carter with disbelief and gratitude. One of them spoke quietly. "Doctor, you saved his life?" Dr. Carter simply nodded. "We need to get him to a hospital as soon as possible." The captain soon made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be returning to the gate so medical personnel can assist our passenger. But before we do that, I would like to thank the doctor who stepped forward to help during this emergency." Passengers looked toward Dr. Carter again. Many of them had no idea what had happened just minutes earlier at the gate. When the aircraft returned to the gate, paramedics quickly entered the plane. They took over care of the patient and prepared him for transport. As they wheeled him down the aisle, the man weakly looked at Dr. Carter. "Thank you," Dr. Carter nodded. "You are going to be all right." Outside the aircraft, the same security officers stood near the gate. They watched silently as Dr. Carter stepped off the plane. The gate agent stood behind the counter looking deeply uncomfortable. She avoided eye contact. One of the officers approached Dr. Carter slowly. "I owe you an apology." Dr. Carter looked at him calmly. "You were just doing your job." The officer shook his head. "No, you were doing yours. And today it saved someone's life." A few passengers who had witnessed everything walked past Dr. Carter. Several of them stopped to shake his hand. Others simply nodded with quiet respect. The flight attendant who had first called for help stepped out of the jet bridge. "Doctor, the captain would like to thank you personally." Dr. Carter smiled slightly. He followed her back toward the aircraft. Sometimes the person others doubt the most turns out to be the one everyone needs the most. And on that afternoon at Chicago International Airport, one man's calm decision to help had turned suspicion into something very different. Respect. As the paramedics wheeled the patient down the jet bridge, the passengers inside the aircraft were still talking quietly about what had just happened. Many of them kept glancing toward Dr. Carter. Just minutes earlier, most of them had never even noticed him standing near the gate. Now he was the reason one passenger was still alive. Dr. Carter slowly closed his medical bag. The flight attendant who had helped him during the emergency was still standing nearby. She looked both relieved and amazed. "Doctor, I have never seen someone act so calmly during something like that." Dr. Carter gave a small smile. "You get used to it after a while." The flight attendant shook her head. "Still, you saved his life." A few passengers nearby began clapping again. Soon, several more people joined in. The applause spread through the cabin until almost everyone was clapping. Dr. Carter looked slightly embarrassed by the attention. He raised his hand politely. "Thank you. But I was just doing my job." A man sitting across the aisle spoke up. "Well, you did it better than anyone else could have." Another passenger nodded. "That man would not be alive right now without you." The cabin slowly grew quiet again. A few minutes later, the captain stepped out of the cockpit and walked down the aisle. Passengers watched curiously as he approached Dr. Carter. The captain extended his hand. "Dr. Carter, thank you for what you did today." Dr. Carter shook his hand. "Of course." The captain looked around at the passengers for a moment. Then he lowered his voice slightly. "I also heard about what happened at the gate before boarding." Dr. Carter nodded slowly. "It was nothing." The captain shook his head. "It was not nothing." He glanced toward the aircraft door where the security officers were still visible in the distance. The captain spoke again. Sometimes people make quick judgments without understanding the situation. Dr. Carter simply shrugged. It happens. The captain looked at him with quiet respect. Well, today, those judgments almost cost us the only doctor who could save that man's life. Dr. Carter said nothing. He simply looked out the aircraft window for a moment. On the runway, another plane was taking off into the bright afternoon sky. The captain spoke again. Dr. Carter, when we resume boarding, I would like to move you to first class. Dr. Carter shook his head gently. That is not necessary. The captain smiled slightly. It is the least we can do. Passengers nearby nodded in agreement. Someone spoke from the back of the cabin. Give the doctor the best seat on the plane. Soft laughter spread through the cabin. Dr. Carter sighed and finally nodded. All right, but only if everyone else gets where they need to go safely today. The captain smiled. That sounds like a fair deal. A few minutes later, the paramedics returned from the jet bridge. One of them walked directly toward Dr. Carter. Doctor, the patient is stable. He's being transported to the hospital now. Dr. Carter nodded with relief. Good. The paramedic extended his hand. You gave him a real chance today. Dr. Carter shook his hand. Just make sure he gets the care he needs from here. The paramedic nodded. We will. Soon after that, the passengers were asked to remain seated as preparations were made for departure again. Outside the aircraft, the gate agent was still standing behind the counter. She watched quietly as Dr. Carter returned to his seat. Her expression was very different now. The confidence she had shown earlier had completely disappeared. One of the security officers walked over to her. You know that man saved her life today. The agent looked down at the desk. Yes, I know. The officer crossed his arms. Maybe next time we should look a little closer before assuming something is wrong. The agent nodded slowly but said nothing. Inside the aircraft, the captain returned to the cockpit. Moments later, his voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience today. We will now prepare for departure to Los Angeles. And once again, I would like to personally thank the doctor on board who responded during our emergency. The cabin filled with applause one more time. Dr. Carter simply leaned back in his seat and looked out the window. For him, the applause did not matter. What mattered was that somewhere in the city below them, a man who almost died on that flight now had another chance to see tomorrow. And sometimes that was the only reward that truly mattered.